Welcome to the Moonlit archive. Tonight's entry, the ancient computer that shouldn't exist. In 1901, sponge divers off a small Greek island pulled something from the seafloor that should not exist. It was a computer, built more than 2,000 years ago. The device was no larger than a shoebox. Inside its corroded bronze casing, researchers would eventually count more than 30 interlocking gears, precision-cut teeth, some barely a millimeter across, meshing in arrangements that would not be seen again in any surviving mechanism for 14 centuries. It tracked the cycles of the sun and moon. It predicted lunar and solar eclipses decades in advance. It mapped the wandering paths of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and it modeled their motion using a theory of the cosmos that would not be published in Europe until Copernicus in 1543. When the fragments were first recovered, no one understood what they were looking at. For decades, the corroded mass sat in a museum drawer. It took X-ray imaging in the 1970s to reveal the gearwork hidden inside. It took 21st century CT scanning, the same technology used to image the interior of a living brain, to read the tiny Greek inscriptions buried between the layers of bronze, instructions etched by a maker whose name we still do not know. The machine had no power source, no electricity. You turned it with a hand crank, and the gears translated that single rotation into dozens of simultaneous outputs, pointers and dials spinning at different speeds on different scales, each one tracking a different cycle of the sky. One full turn of the input knob advanced the display by 1 solar day. 76 turns moved through an entire Ka-Lip-Ik cycle, a 76-year correction to the Greek calendar, so precise that it drifts from modern atomic timekeeping by only a few hours per century. No written record describes it. No ancient author mentions it by name. Whatever tradition of knowledge produced this device, the school, the workshop, the line of masters who taught the craft, that tradition was broken. Lost. The gears seized with salt and calcium carbonate at the bottom of the Aegean, and the world built nothing like it again until medieval clockmakers in 14th century Europe began, unknowingly, to reinvent what had already been invented. But before we understand what it computed, and who might have built it, and what it tells us about a civilization we thought we knew, we need to go back to the moment it was found. To a morning in 1900, off the coast of a tiny island between Crete and the Greek mainland. To a crew of men who made their living diving for sponges. And to the wreck, they stumbled onto 60 meters below the surface, a Roman cargo ship, resting on a shelf of rock where it had settled roughly 2,000 years before. The island was called Antikythera, a narrow strip of limestone rising from deep water caught in the strait where the Sea of Crete meets the open Mediterranean. Currents run hard through that channel. Fishermen knew it, and divers knew it, the kind of place where the sea gives nothing up easily. The year was 1900. The captain of the sponge boat was Dimitrios Kontos, and his crew had been working the coastline of North Africa before a storm pushed them to shelter in Antikythera's small harbor. When the weather broke, they decided to try the local waters before heading home. One of the divers, a man named Elias Stadiatis, went down first. Settle in. The story moves slowly, between 2 millennia, between 2 islands, between 2 men who touched the same bronze. There is no hurry. The mechanism waited 20 centuries to be understood. It can wait a little longer for you. If you drift off before the gears are decoded, that is perfectly fine. They will still be turning when you return. They have always been turning. Even at the bottom of the sea, even in the dark, even under centuries of silt and silence, the gears remember what they were built to do. And so do we. The water closes over him. Elias Stadiatis descends feet first, pulled by a flat stone weighing perhaps 30 pounds, the Skandalo Tra, the diving stone, gripped between his feet. The stone falls and he falls with it, dropping through the water column at a rate that modern divers would consider reckless. The light changes as he goes. Blue becomes blue-gray. Blue-gray becomes gray. Gray becomes a dim, underwater twilight that is not darkness, but is not light either, a half-world. A liminal space where shapes appear and dissolve at the edge of vision. The pressure builds. At 60 meters, the water exerts roughly 6 times the atmospheric pressure at the surface. His canvas suit compresses around him. His ears ache, then pop, then ache again. His breathing through the rubber hose becomes more labored. The hand pump above is designed for shallower work, and at this depth, the air arrives thin and insufficient. He breathes carefully. He moves slowly. He knows the limits. The air comes through the hose in pulses, each stroke of the hand pump above delivering a burst of compressed air that the diver breathes in gratefully, expanding his lungs against the water pressure that is trying to compress them. The taste of the air is specific: rubber from the hose, oil from the pump, a faint metallic tang from the brass fittings. The diver learns to read the air. If the flow weakens, the pump operator above is tiring. If the flow becomes irregular, the hose may be kinked. If the flow stops entirely, the diver has perhaps 2 minutes of air in his suit before he must begin to ascend or die. Every sponge diver knew about the bends. They did not call it that, they called it the sickness, or the paralysis, or simply the pain. They knew that men who came up too fast from deep water sometimes lost the feeling in their legs, or collapsed on the deck writhing, or died within hours of surfacing. They did not know why. The science of decompression sickness, the formation of nitrogen bubbles in the blood and tissues during rapid ascent, would not be understood until 1907, when John Scott Haldane published his decompression tables for the Royal Navy. In 1901, the sponge divers of Sea Me had only experience. They knew that coming up slowly was safer. They knew that resting on the way was safer still. And they knew that sometimes, even if you did everything right, the sickness came anyway. Elias had been diving since he was 13. He was now, we do not know his exact age, but most Sea Me sponge divers began as boys, apprenticed to their fathers or uncles, learning the trade by watching and then doing. By the time a diver was 20, he had been to the bottom of the sea 1,000 times. By 30, his body carried the evidence, the joint pain, the hearing loss, the subtle neurological damage that accumulated over years of repeated pressure exposure. Many divers did not reach 40. The profession consumed them. But the profession was all they had. The sponge trade was Sea Me's economy. The island's fleet of sponge boats, perhaps 200 vessels at its peak, ranged across the eastern Mediterranean every spring, from the Dodecanese to North Africa, from Crete to the coast of Egypt. The sponges they harvested were sold in Athens, in Constantinople, in London, and Paris. They were used for bathing, for painting, for medical dressing, for the delicate cleaning of jewelry and fine instruments. The sponge was a luxury product, and the men who harvested it were working-class heroes on an island that had little else to offer the world. The dive that changed history was not supposed to be unusual. The crew had anchored off Antikythera to wait out a storm. The captain, Dimitrios Kondos, an experienced diver himself, suggested they use the downtime to scout the bottom for sponge beds. Elias volunteered to go down first. He landed on the sea floor in a cloud of silt. The silt is fine on that slope, a mixture of mineral particles, decomposed marine organisms, and the slow accumulation of material that has been settling through the water column for millennia. It rises at the slightest disturbance, a footfall, a current, the displacement of a body arriving from above, and hangs in the water like smoke, reducing visibility to nothing. Elias waited. He crouched on the bottom, breathing slowly through the hose, listening to the rush of air and the pulse of blood in his ears, and waited for the silt to settle. It took perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute. The particles drifted downward, the water cleared, and the shapes emerged. They were everywhere, half buried in the sediment, scattered across a rocky slope, encrusted with coral and sea growth but still recognizable, human forms. Arms, legs, torsos, heads. A bronze horse, green with vert de gris, lying on its side. A marble figure twice life-size, its face eroded but its pose still graceful. And between the statues, smaller objects amphoras, glass vessels, pottery, coins. The debris field of a shipwreck, spread across the bottom by 2,000 years of current and silt. Elias did not stay long. The depth was dangerous, and the vision was disorienting. The shapes in the dim water looked, he said later, like a battlefield. Like the dead after a war, lying where they had fallen, undisturbed. He grabbed the first object his hand found, the bronze hand, broken at the wrist, and began his ascent. When he surfaced and showed the hand to Condos, the captain was skeptical. He thought Elias was suffering from nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, the confusion and euphoria that can affect divers at depth. He went down himself to check. He came up with a bronze head. The word went out. The Greek government was notified. The Royal Hellenic Navy dispatched a ship, the transport vessel Mycale, to supervise a formal salvage operation. The Semi divers, who had expected to spend the spring harvesting sponges, found themselves instead pulling antiquities from the sea floor, working at depths that tested the limits of their equipment and their bodies. 2 divers died during the salvage. One was named Yos Kritikos. He surfaced from a deep dive, complained of a headache, and was dead within the hour, a massive nitrogen embolism, a bubble of gas in the bloodstream, blocking a vessel in the brain. He was not the last. Several others were permanently paralyzed. Others lost hearing in one or both ears. The work lasted 9 months, from November 1900 through September 1901, though the most intensive period was the spring and summer, when the weather allowed regular dives. The divers brought up dozens of bronze and marble statues, glassware, pottery, jewelry, coins, and one corroded lump of metal that no one could identify. The bronze statues came up green. The marble came up white, or nearly. The sea had bleached them, stripped them of any paint that might once have colored their surfaces, leaving them ghostly, pale, like figures emerging from a dream. The mechanism came up looking like a rock. A greenish, mineral-encrusted rock, roughly the size of a large dictionary, weighing perhaps 30 pounds. It did not gleam. It did not impress. It looked like something the sea had chewed and spat out. The lump was set aside. The statues were celebrated. Here is something worth knowing about the salvage. It was the first major underwater archaeological excavation in history. Before Antikythera, the idea of systematically recovering artifacts from a deepwater shipwreck was unprecedented. The Greek government, the Royal Hellenic Navy, the archaeologists from the National Museum, none of them had done anything like this before. They were inventing the discipline of underwater archaeology in real time, on the fly, with equipment that was designed for sponge harvesting and a crew that was trained for commercial diving, not scientific recovery. The mistakes were inevitable. Artifacts were damaged during recovery, bronze figures dented against the ship's hull as they were hauled up, marble limbs broken by clumsy handling. The site was not mapped. The positions of objects on the seafloor were not recorded. Information about the spatial relationship between artifacts, information that modern marine archaeologists consider essential, was lost. And the corroded lump that would turn out to be the most important object in the wreck was treated with no more care than any other piece of debris. The divers did not know. They could not have known. They were sponge fishermen, doing the best they could with what they had, risking their lives in water that was too deep and too cold for the equipment they were using. They deserve credit, not blame. They found the wreck. They recovered the cargo. They gave the world one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The fact that they did not recognize the significance of one particular corroded lump is not a failure. It is a reminder that discovery is not a single moment. It is a process. And the process, for the Antikythera Mechanism, would take over a century to complete. And 2,000 years before any of this happened, on the island of Rhodes, a craftsman lit his lamp and began to cut a gear. The bronze is warm. Not hot, not like the ingot fresh from the furnace, which glows orange and sings when the hammer strikes it. This warmth is subtler. The warmth of metal that has been held in the hands, worked with files and punches and engraving tools, polished with fine sand until the surface catches the lamplight and throws it back in a golden blur. Bronze that has been handled for days becomes warm in a way that is personal, imprinted with the heat of the craftsman's hands, responsive to his touch, almost alive. He works in a small room, a workshop, an ergoster eon in the Greek, on the island of Rhodes in the city of Rhodes sometime around the year 100 before the Common Era. We do not know his name. We will never know his name. The mechanism that he is building, the most sophisticated piece of technology in the ancient world, bears no maker's mark, no inscription that identifies its creator. We know it was made. We know roughly where and roughly when. But the person who made it is invisible. He exists only in the precision of his work. The workshop is small but well-equipped. A workbench, heavy, wooden, scarred with the marks of 1,000 projects. An anvil, not the blacksmith's anvil, massive and crude, but a jeweler's anvil, small and precise, with a flat, polished face no larger than a man's palm. Files, dozens of them, in graduated sizes, from coarse rasps for shaping to needle files so fine that their teeth are barely visible. Punches. Gravers. A bow drill, a simple rotary tool, powered by the back and forth motion of a bow, capable of drilling holes in bronze with startling accuracy. And the bronze itself, sheets and discs and blanks, cut to rough size, waiting to be shaped. The lamp is olive oil. It burns with a warm, golden light, not bright by modern standards, but sufficient. The craftsman has been working by lamplight since he was an apprentice. His eyes are trained to it. He can see the gleam of a file mark, the shadow of an imperfection, the precise moment when a gear tooth reaches its final shape, all by the soft, flickering light of burning oil. There is a smell in the workshop. The smell of bronze filings, a sharp, metallic smell, slightly sweet, like copper pennies warmed in the hand. The smell of olive oil, used to lubricate the files and prevent the bronze from clogging their teeth. The smell of the lamp, warm, slightly smoky, the particular fragrance of burning olive oil that was the background scent of every interior space in the ancient Mediterranean. And beneath these, fainter, the smell of the sea, because Rhodes is an island, and the sea is always present, its salt carried on every breeze that enters through the workshop's narrow window. He is cutting gears. This is the part that still astonishes modern engineers. Not the idea of gears, gears had existed for centuries, used in mills and water-lifting devices and simple machines throughout the Greek and Roman world. What astonishes is the precision. The gears in the Antikythera Mechanism have triangular teeth, hand-cut, hand-filed, spaced with a regularity that implies the use of a dividing plate or some equivalent tool for ensuring even spacing. The teeth are roughly 1.5 millimeters wide. The gears mesh with each other smoothly, without binding, without excessive play. The tolerances are comparable to those of a good 19th century pocket watch. 1.5 millimeters, in the 1st century before Christ. Cut by hand, by lamplight, with files and gravers and a level of skill that we cannot fully explain, because the training that produced this level of craftsmanship has left no record. We have no manuals, no textbooks, no apprenticeship documents. We have only the gears themselves, which speak more eloquently than any manual could. The craftsmen work slowly. A single gear might take a day. The mechanism will eventually contain at least 30 gears. Some estimates place the number closer to 40, arranged in a complex, interlocking system that is unlike anything else in the ancient world. Each gear must mesh precisely with its neighbors. Each must turn at the correct ratio to the others. An error in a single tooth, a fraction of a millimeter too wide, a fraction too narrow, would propagate through the entire system, throwing off calculations, jamming the mechanism, rendering weeks of work useless. He works in silence, or near silence, the soft scrape of the file, the tap of the hammer, the hiss of bronze dust being blown from a freshly cut surface. The sounds of precision. The sounds of a man who is measuring his work not in hours, but in fractions of a millimeter. There's a rhythm to the cutting. A gear tooth is not shaped in one pass. It is roughed out first, the file held at an angle, removing material in broad strokes, defining the triangular profile. Then refined, a finer file, smaller strokes, the profile sharpened, the sides flattened. Then finished, the finest file, barely touching the surface, removing material in quantities too small to see, guided by touch rather than sight. The craftsman's fingers run along the tooth. He feels the profile. He feels whether the angle is correct, whether the surface is smooth, whether the tooth will mesh cleanly with its neighbor. His fingers are his instruments. They are calibrated by years of practice to detect variations that his eyes cannot see. He does not have calculus. He does not have trigonometry in the formal algebraic sense. He has geometry, the geometry of Euclid, which was 3 centuries old by his time, and which every educated Greek studied as a matter of course. He has astronomy, the accumulated observations of Babylonian and Egyptian and Greek astronomers, spanning centuries, recording the positions of the stars and planets with a precision that modern instruments have confirmed to be remarkable. And he has something else, something harder to quantify, something that we might call mechanical intuition. The ability to hold in his mind a system of interlocking movements, 30 gears turning at different rates, driving pointers across dials, encoding the motions of celestial bodies in the language of bronze, and to build it, 1 gear at a time, without error. This is what we lost. Not the gears themselves, gears can be reinvented. Not the astronomy that was preserved in texts, transmitted through the Islamic world, eventually recovered by Europe. What we lost was the synthesis, the ability to combine mathematical knowledge with mechanical skill. The tradition that said, if you can calculate it, you can build it. The chain of master and apprentice, stretching back centuries, that produced a person capable of translating the motions of the cosmos into bronze. When the Roman world fell, the chain broke. The workshops closed. The apprentices found no masters. The customers who had commissioned astronomical instruments lost interest or lost wealth or simply died. And the knowledge, the accumulated knowledge of centuries of craft, the intuitive understanding of how bronze behaves under a file, how gears mesh, how a gear train can be designed to produce a specific ratio, that knowledge went silent. Not erased, not destroyed by fire or war. Just. Not passed on, not taught to the next person. Not spoken aloud in a workshop on a quiet evening, master to student, the way it had been spoken for generations. The silence was so complete that when the mechanism was finally found, 2,000 years later, the first scientists to examine it did not believe it was real. They thought it was a hoax, or a medieval artifact accidentally mixed with the ancient cargo, because nothing they knew about the ancient world suggested that such a thing was possible. And yet it was possible. It was not only possible, it was achieved. The mechanism exists, it was built, it worked, and its existence forces us to confront a truth that is simultaneously thrilling and humbling. We do not know what the ancient world was capable of. We know only what survived. And most of what they made, most of what they knew, most of what they built, most of what they thought did not survive. The Antikythera Mechanism is the exception. It is the single thread that escaped the fire, the single voice that survived the silence. And if one such device existed, how many others were there? What else was made and lost and forgotten? We will never know. The sea keeps its secrets. The workshops are dust. The craftsmen are nameless. But the mechanism, this one, corroded, fragmentary, miraculous mechanism, tells us that the silence is not the same as absence, that the things we have lost are not the same as the things that never existed. But the craftsman knew it was possible. He was building it, 1 gear at a time, in a workshop on Rhodes, by lamplight, in the quiet hours of a Mediterranean evening. The ship was Roman. Or rather, it was a ship operating in the Roman commercial sphere, a large merchant vessel, perhaps 40 meters long, carrying a cargo of extraordinary value from the eastern Mediterranean toward Italy. The cargo manifest, reconstructed from what the divers recovered, reads like a catalog of Greek civilization's greatest hits. Bronze statues, original works, not copies, including a life-sized figure of a youth that is now one of the finest Greek bronzes in existence. Marble sculptures, some original, some Roman copies of famous Greek works. Glassware, delicate vessels from the workshops of the Levant, blown and colored in styles that suggest the 1st century BCE. Pottery, coins, jewelry, and luxury goods of every description. The ship was carrying Greek art to Rome. This was not unusual. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had conquered the Greek world, and Roman collectors had developed an insatiable appetite for Greek art. The great houses of the Roman aristocracy were decorated with Greek bronzes and marbles, originals when they could be obtained, copies when they could not. Greek art was the ultimate status symbol. A Roman senator who could display an original Praxit, Elias or Lysippos in his atrium was making a statement about his wealth, his taste, and his connection to the civilization that Rome had conquered and could not stop admiring. Here is a detail about the cargo that I think is worth pausing for. Among the objects recovered from the wreck were coins, silver tetradrachms, minted at Pergamon, dating to the 1st century BCE, and pottery transportum for as, the standard shipping containers of the ancient world, tall and narrow with pointed bases designed to fit into sand-filled racks in the hold. Some of the AM for as still contain traces of their original contents: wine, olive oil, the dried residue of fish sauce. The ship was not merely carrying art. It was carrying the material culture of the Greek world, the wine for the table, the oil for the lamp, the art for the wall. A complete package, a civilization compressed into a cargo hold. The ship sailed from the eastern Mediterranean, from Rhodes or one of the nearby islands, based on the pottery and coins found in the wreck. Rhodes was a logical point of origin. In the 1st century BCE, Rhodes was one of the great trading centers of the eastern Mediterranean, a free city, wealthy, cosmopolitan, famous for its schools of philosophy and rhetoric and its tradition of scientific and technological innovation. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, had stood at the harbor entrance 2 centuries earlier. It was gone by then, toppled by an earthquake, but its memory lingered. Rhodes was a place where great things were made. The ship's route would have taken it westward across the Mediterranean, past Crete, past the southern Peloponnese, past the small island of Antikythera that sat in the strait between them. The strait was treacherous. Strong currents, unpredictable winds, rocky shores with few safe harbors. Ships passed through quickly when they could and sheltered behind Antikythera when they could not. This ship did not make it through. We do not know exactly what happened. A storm, most likely. The Mediterranean is prone to sudden, violent storms, particularly in the autumn months, when the seasonal winds shift and the sea turns from placid to dangerous without warning. The ship may have been driven against the rocks. It may have taken on water in heavy seas. It may have been overloaded. The cargo was immensely heavy, bronze and marble weighing tons, and a ship carrying too much weight sits low in the water and is vulnerable to waves that a lighter vessel would ride over. Whatever the cause, the ship went down in deep water off the northeast coast of Antikythera, settling on a rocky slope at a depth of roughly 60 meters. The crew, how many, we do not know, but the skeletal remains of at least 4 individuals were recovered from the wreck, went with it. The cargo scattered across the sea floor as the wooden hull broke apart, and the bronze and marble figures tumbled into the silt. And the mechanism, the bronze computer, the most sophisticated device in the ancient world, sank with them, landing in the darkness, in the cold, in the silence that would last for 20 centuries. The wood rotted. The hull dissolved into the sediment over centuries, leaving only the cargo, which was stone and metal, and did not rot, scattered across the bottom in a debris field roughly 50 meters long. The bronze figures developed a thick coating of ver de gris, the green patina of corroded copper alloy, and then a further layer of marine encrustation, as corals and sea organisms colonized their surfaces. The mechanism corroded differently. Its thin bronze plates, some less than 2 millimeters thick, were slowly eaten by the salt water, the gears fusing together as corrosion products filled the spaces between them, locking the mechanism into a single, solid mass. The sea preserved and destroyed in equal measure. It kept the bronze from the oxygen that would have corroded it to dust on land. It kept the temperature stable. The deep Mediterranean holds a nearly constant temperature year-round, roughly 14 degrees Celsius, cool enough to slow chemical reactions, warm enough to prevent the kind of ice damage that destroys artifacts in colder waters. But it froze the mechanism in place. The gears locked, the inscriptions obscured, the internal structure hidden beneath layers of mineral deposit that would take modern technology to penetrate. Here is a detail that haunts marine archaeologists. The mechanism was bronze. Bronze survives in salt water far better than iron, which rusts to nothing within decades. If the mechanism had been made of iron, as many medieval devices were, it would have vanished entirely. There would be nothing to find. No gears, no inscriptions, no evidence that it had ever existed. The choice of bronze was not deliberate. The craftsman used bronze because it was the material available, the material his tradition worked in, the material that could be filed to the precision he needed. But it was that choice, that accidental, unconscious, tradition-driven choice, that preserved the device for 2,000 years. If the tradition had used iron, we would know nothing. The greatest technological achievement of the ancient world would have rusted into oblivion, and we would still believe that the ancients could not build machines. For 2,000 years, the mechanism sat on the sea floor. 2,000 years of currents moving across it. 2,000 years of silt settling over it. 2,000 years of fish swimming past it, of octopuses sheltering in its crevices, of the slow, patient work of the sea transforming a precision instrument into a corroded lump. And then Elias Stadiatis dropped his diving stone into the water and went down to look for sponges. He knew the sky. This sounds simple, but it is not. Knowing the sky, truly knowing it, in the way that an ancient Greek astronomer knew it, meant understanding a system of extraordinary complexity without any of the tools that modern astronomers take for granted. No telescopes, no spectroscopes, no photography, no computers, only the naked eye, patient observation, and centuries of accumulated records. The craftsmen on Rhodes had access to this knowledge. Rhodes was home to one of the ancient world's great astronomical traditions. Hipparchus, arguably the greatest astronomer of antiquity, had worked on Rhodes in the 2nd century BCE, perhaps a generation or two before the mechanism was built. Hipparchus had cataloged the positions of over 800 stars. He had discovered the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that causes the positions of the stars to shift over millennia. He had developed a trigonometric system for calculating the positions of celestial bodies. And he had done all of this with nothing but his eyes and his mind and a sighting instrument called a dioptra. The mechanism encodes Hipparchus's work. This is one of the most striking things about it. The lunar model built into the gears, a sophisticated system that tracks the moon's position, speed, and anomaly, closely matches the mathematical tables that Hipparchus developed. It is possible, some scholars think probable, that the mechanism was built by a craftsman who had studied under Hipparchus, or who had access to Hipparchus's unpublished notes, or who belonged to a workshop tradition that Hipparchus had influenced. There is a fascination here that I cannot pass without mentioning. Hipparchus's star catalog, the list of 800 stars, with their positions measured to a fraction of a degree, was the most accurate such catalog in the ancient world. It was not surpassed until Tycho Brahe compiled his own catalog in the 16th century, using instruments that were larger, more precise, and funded by the Danish crown. Hipparchus achieved comparable accuracy with a brass tube and a graduated circle. On the roof of a building on Rhodes, using nothing but patience and a clear sky. The knowledge that Hipparchus gathered was not merely recorded, it was transmitted through students, through texts, through the accumulated tradition of a school of astronomy that flourished on Rhodes for generations. And somewhere in that tradition, somewhere between Hipparchus's observations and the craftsman's workshop, someone had the idea of translating the astronomical tables into gears, of making the math physical, of building a machine that did what the tables did, but automatically, crank by crank, gear by gear, the cosmos turning in your hands. We will come back to this, to the connection between the astronomer and the mechanic, to the idea that the mechanism was not just a machine, but a physical embodiment of a mathematical theory, a way of making abstract knowledge tangible, of turning the invisible motions of the cosmos into something you could hold in your hands and see with your eyes. But first, let us understand what the craftsman was trying to encode. Let us begin with what he was trying to encode, because the ambition of it, the sheer scope of what this single device was designed to do, is almost impossible to overstate. The sun, the most visible celestial body, the one that structures every human life, that defines the day and the season and the year, that governs the planting and the harvest, that rises and sets with a regularity that is the foundation of all human timekeeping. The craftsman needed to track the sun's position against the background of fixed stars, its annual journey through the 12 constellations of the zodiac. This required a gear ratio that modeled the solar year, 365.25 days, give or take, with sufficient precision that the error would not accumulate to a noticeable degree over the lifetime of the mechanism. He achieved this. The solar gear train in the mechanism is accurate to better than 1 degree over the duration of its designed operational life. The moon, more complex than the sun, because the moon's orbit is not a simple circle. The moon moves faster at some points in its orbit than at others, a variation called the lunar anomaly. The craftsman modeled this variation using a brilliant mechanical trick, an eccentric gear, mounted off-center on a larger gear, producing a non-uniform output from a uniform input. It is, in mechanical terms, the equivalent of an ep-I-C-cul, the same mathematical concept that the Greek astronomers used to describe the moon's irregular motion, translated from geometry into bronze. The planets. The mechanism tracked Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. Planetary motion is far more complex than lunar or solar motion, because planets appear to reverse direction in the sky, the phenomenon called retrograde motion, caused by the relative positions of the Earth and the planet in their orbits. The craftsman modeled retrograde motion using ep-I-C-click gearing, gears mounted on gears, rotating on rotating platforms, producing complex, looping output from simple, circular input. It is the most mechanically ambitious part of the device, and the part that is least well understood, because the planetary gears are the most heavily corroded and the most difficult to image through the encrustation. And then there were the cycles. The Meh-Tun-Ik cycle, the 19-year period after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same days of the solar year. The Babylonians had discovered it. The Greeks had refined it. The craftsman built it into his gears. The Saros cycle, the roughly 18-year period after which solar and lunar eclipses recur in similar configurations. The mechanism could predict eclipses. It could tell you, months or years in advance, when the moon would pass through the Earth's shadow, or when the moon would pass between the Earth and the sun. It could even predict the color of the eclipse. An inscription on the mechanism's backplate mentions eclipses as reddish or dark, suggesting that the maker understood that the color of a lunar eclipse depends on the Earth's atmospheric conditions. The Ka-Lip-Ik cycle, a refinement of the Meh-Tun-Ik cycle, spanning 76 years, correcting a small error in the Meh-Tun-Ik calculation. Named for Ka-Lippus of Sis-I-Kus, who proposed it in the 4th century BCE. The Olympiad cycle, the 4-year period between Olympic Games, tracked by a subsidiary dial on the back of the mechanism. This dial also tracked the Pan-Hellenic Games, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the Nemean Games, the Isthmian Games at Corinth. The mechanism was, among other things, a sports calendar. It could tell you when the next Olympics would begin. The XL-Igmos cycle, a triple Saros spanning 54 years, used for even more precise eclipse prediction. And here is a detail that stops me every time I encounter it. The Saros dial on the back of the mechanism includes a set of tiny inscriptions, glyphs, engraved beside specific eclipse predictions, indicating the expected characteristics of each eclipse. Some eclipses are marked as solar, some as lunar, and some are described with a word that translates roughly as reddish, indicating a lunar eclipse in which the moon would appear red rather than dark, because the Earth's atmosphere would bend sunlight around the planet's edge and illuminate the moon with a ruddy glow. The craftsman predicted the color of eclipses. Think about what that means. He understood, or the astronomical tradition he drew from understood, that the appearance of a lunar eclipse depends on the condition of the Earth's atmosphere, that some eclipses would be dark and some would be red, and the difference could be predicted in advance. This is not something that can be calculated from orbital mechanics alone. It requires an understanding of atmospheric optics, of the way light bends when it passes through gas. The Greeks had this understanding. They had it 2,000 years before the physics of atmospheric refraction was formally described. The mechanism encoded not only positions and dates, but qualities. Not only when, but what it would look like. The craftsman was building not just a calculator, but a simulator, a device that could describe the future in terms specific enough to be verified by observation. All of this in a bronze box the size of a shoebox, built 2,000 years ago, by a man whose name we do not know, in a workshop we have never found, using techniques that were lost and not recovered for over a millennium. He knew the sky, and he found a way to hold it in his hands. For 50 years, no one knew what it was. The mechanism, recovered from the wreck, along with the statues and the glassware and the coins, arrived at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens in 1902. It was in 3 main fragments and dozens of smaller pieces, all of them heavily corroded, all of them encrusted with marine deposit, all of them unrecognizable to anyone who was not already looking for what they contained. The archaeologists focused on the statues. The statues were spectacular. The youth of Antikythera, a bronze figure over 6 feet tall, its pose dynamic, its anatomy perfect, became one of the most famous artworks in Greece. It was cleaned, studied, photographed, exhibited. Museum visitors stood before it and marveled. Scholars wrote papers about its style, its provenance, its place in the history of Greek sculpture. And in a drawer in the same museum, the mechanism sat, corroded, forgotten, ignored. There are photographs from this period, early 20th century photographs of the mechanism fragments, sitting on a table in the museum's conservation laboratory. They look like rocks, like lumps of mineral deposit pulled from a cave. Without context, without explanation, you would never guess that these green, shapeless masses contained precision gears. You would never guess that inside them, frozen in corrosion, was a device that could predict the future positions of celestial bodies. A few people noticed. Valir Eos Staiis, a Greek archaeologist, examined the fragments in 1902 and saw what appeared to be gear wheels through cracks in the incrustation. He suggested that the object was some kind of astronomical instrument. His colleagues were skeptical. Gear mechanisms of this complexity, they argued, could not have existed in the ancient world. The object must be medieval, an astrolabe or clock mechanism that had fallen onto the wreck at some later date, or been accidentally mixed with the ancient cargo during the salvage. Staiis was not wrong, but he could not prove he was right. The technology to look inside the corroded mass, to see the gears without destroying the fragments, did not yet exist. This is one of those moments in the history of science that makes you want to reach back through time and shake someone. The evidence was there. The gears were visible through cracks in the incrustation. A trained eye, and Stai's was a trained eye, could see them. But the scientific establishment of the early 20th century could not accept what the evidence implied, because the implication contradicted everything they believed about the ancient world. The ancient Greeks, the argument went, were philosophers, theorists. They understood mathematics and geometry and the motions of the heavens, but they did not build machines. They did not work with their hands. The separation between theory and practice, between the life of the mind and the life of the workshop, was fundamental to the way historians understood the ancient world. Philosophers thought, craftsmen built, and the two worlds did not overlap. The mechanism contradicted this entirely. It was the product of both worlds, a device that required both mathematical sophistication and manual skill, both astronomical theory and mechanical practice. It was proof that the ancient world contained people who could think and build in equal measure, and the historians, rather than accept this proof, dismissed it, because the evidence was inconvenient, because it did not fit the narrative they had constructed. Because it is easier to disbelieve the impossible than to revise the possible. And so the mechanism returned to its drawer, and the decades passed, and the gears continued to corrode in the darkness of a museum cabinet the way they had corroded in the darkness of the sea. If you have drifted away, if the quiet of the museum has carried you off, then rest. The mechanism waited 50 years for someone to understand it. It is patient. The gears are patient. The truth inside the corrosion is patient. And so am I. For those still with me, let me tell you about the man who finally looked. Why build it? This is the question that haunts the mechanism. Not how, the how, while extraordinary, is ultimately a matter of skill and patience and the accumulated knowledge of a craft tradition. But why? Why would someone spend months, perhaps years, cutting and filing and assembling 30-plus precision gears into a device that modeled the motions of the heavens? The practical answer is calendrical. The Greek world ran on multiple, overlapping calendars, solar and lunar, civic and religious, local and panhellenic. Every city had its own calendar, with its own month names, its own year start, its own method of inter-cal-I-shun, the insertion of extra days or months to keep the lunar calendar aligned with the solar year. The Athenian calendar was different from the Spartan calendar, which was different from the calendar on Rhodes, which was different from the calendar in Alexandria. A merchant trading across the Mediterranean needed to know which month it was in 3 different systems simultaneously. A diplomat negotiating a treaty needed to agree on a date that both parties could recognize. A priest planning a festival needed to know when the moon would be full. Knowing when the next eclipse would occur was more than an intellectual exercise. Eclipses were omens. They signaled the favor or displeasure of the gods. A lunar eclipse on the eve of a battle could determine whether an army advanced or retreated. The Athenian general Nicias, in 413 BCE, delayed his army's retreat from Syracuse because of a lunar eclipse. His soothsayers advised him to wait 27 days, and in those 27 days, the Syracusans trapped and destroyed his entire force. The ability to predict eclipses was, in a real sense, the ability to predict and manage fear. Knowing when the next Olympic Games would begin, and the Pythian Games, and the Nemean Games, and the Isthmian Games, was a matter of civic pride and practical planning. Athletes trained for years. Cities sent delegations. Sacred truces were declared, halting wars to allow safe passage for competitors and spectators. The Olympic truce, the Excavating was one of the oldest and most widely respected institutions in the Greek world. It required advanced knowledge of the game's date, and the mechanism provided it. All of this was encoded in the gears. But the mechanism is more than a calendar. A calendar can be a table, a list of dates, inscribed on a tablet, consulted as needed. The mechanism is a model. It does not merely list the positions of the heavenly bodies, it reproduces them. It turns, and the pointers move, and the dials rotate, and the cosmos unfolds in miniature on the face of a bronze box. It is the difference between reading about the sunrise and watching it happen. The craftsman was not simply recording information. He was creating a simulation, a working model of the universe, driven by gears, operated by a hand crank on the side, displaying the results on multiple dials on both the front and back of the device. Turn the crank, and the sun advances along the zodiac. Turn it more, and the moon completes its monthly cycle, speeding up and slowing down as it passes through the anomaly. Turn it further, and the eclipse predictor activates, showing the Saros cycle spiraling outward on a dial that takes 18 years to complete a single revolution. Imagine holding it, a box in your hands, the size of a large book made of bronze with a wooden case. On the front, a circular dial marked with the signs of the zodiac and the days of the Egyptian calendar. Pointers indicating the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. On the back, 2 large spiral dials, one for the Meh-Tun-Ik cycle, one for the Saros cycle, with subsidiary dials for the Ka-Lip-Ik and X-El-Ig-Mos cycles and the Olympiad counter. You turn the crank, the gears engage, the pointers move. And the universe, the real universe, the one above your head, the one that your ancestors watched for centuries and recorded in tablets and computed in their minds, that universe begins to move in your hands. You can see the moon approaching the node where an eclipse will occur. You can see Mars entering retrograde. You can see the Meh-Tun-Ik cycle spiraling toward its completion. You are holding the cosmos. The philosophical implications would not have been lost on the craftsman or his contemporaries. The Stoics, who were influential on Rhodes, believed that the universe was a rational, ordered system, governed by natural laws that the human mind could discover and understand. The mechanism was proof. It was not merely a tool. It was an argument that the cosmos was comprehensible, that its motions, however complex, could be reduced to the turning of gears. That the mind of man could grasp the mind of the universe. Cicero, the Roman orator, wrote about devices like this. In his dialogue De Republica, composed around 54 BCE, roughly contemporary with the mechanism, he described a mechanical sphere built by Archimedes, which showed the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Cicero had actually seen the device, or one like it. It had been taken from Syracuse as war booty when the Romans sacked the city in 212 BCE. The same siege in which Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier, supposedly while drawing geometric figures in the sand and refusing to move until he had finished his proof. Cicero wrote that this device demonstrated the genius of Archimedes more clearly than any of his mathematical proofs, because it made the invisible visible. It took the abstract motions of the heavens and rendered them in bronze in a form that anyone could understand. When Gallus moved the globe, Cicero wrote, referring to the Roman general who had acquired it, it was actually true that the moon was always as many revolutions behind the sun on the bronze contrivance as would agree with the number of days it was behind it in the sky. The device worked, it was accurate, and it was, by Cicero's account, over a century old when he saw it, already an antique, already a relic of a lost tradition. If Archimedes built one in the 3rd century BCE, and the Antikythera Mechanism was built in the 1st century BCE, then the tradition of celestial mechanism building spanned at least 2 centuries, perhaps longer. Perhaps the Antikythera Mechanism was not the first of its kind, or the only one. Perhaps it was one of many, a production model, the output of a workshop that made these devices for wealthy clients across the Mediterranean. We do not know, we have only this one. And this one was at the bottom of the sea for 2,000 years. If there were others, in collections, in temples, in the palaces of Hellenistic kings, they were melted down for their bronze, or lost, or destroyed in the fires and sackings and casual destructions that consumed so much of the ancient world's material heritage. The Antikythera Mechanism survives because it was shipwrecked. Because it was removed from the world of the living, where it would have been vulnerable to theft and war and recycling, and placed in the world of the dead, where the cold and the dark and the silt preserved it. The craftsmen on Rhodes may have known of Archimedes' sphere. Archimedes had lived 2 generations earlier, in Syracuse, and his works were widely known in the Greek world. The question of lineage, of whether the mechanism descends from Archimedes' tradition, is one of the great unanswered questions of ancient technology. There are suggestive connections. The mechanism uses a mathematical framework, ep-I-cyclic theory, the representation of complex motions as combinations of circular motions, that Archimedes was known to have worked with. The gear ratios in the mechanism correspond to astronomical parameters that Archimedes could have calculated. And Syracuse, where Archimedes lived, was a Greek city with strong commercial and intellectual ties to Rhodes. Ideas traveled. Craftsmen traveled. It is not difficult to imagine a chain of influence. A student of Archimedes carrying the master's design to Rhodes, where a local workshop tradition refined and improved it over several generations. But there is no proof. No inscription says, based on the work of Archimedes. No ancient text describes the mechanism or its workshop. The connection, if it exists, is invisible, preserved only in the geometry of the gears themselves, in the mathematical relationships that link the mechanism to Archimedes' known work. Whether the Antikythera mechanism is a descendant of Archimedes' tradition, or a product of a parallel tradition on Rhodes, or something entirely new, this is a question that scholars continue to debate. What is not debated is the ambition. The sheer, breathtaking ambition of encoding the cosmos in bronze, of saying, the universe is knowable, and I will prove it by building a model that works. In 1951, a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price walked into the National Archaeological Museum in Athens and asked to see the corroded fragments from the Antikythera wreck. Price was an unusual physicist. He was interested in the history of scientific instruments, the physical objects that scientists had used over the centuries to measure and calculate and observe. He collected old astrolabes. He restored medieval clocks. He understood gears the way a linguist understands grammar, as a system with rules, with patterns, with a logic that revealed the intentions of the maker. He looked at the fragments. He looked at the X-rays that a Greek radiographer named Kalos had taken in 1958, shadowy, ambiguous images that showed, for the first time, the outlines of gears inside the corroded mass. And he understood. Not everything, not immediately, but he understood that the object was a geared mechanism of extraordinary complexity. He understood that the gears were ancient, not medieval, not Renaissance, but genuinely ancient, contemporary with the other objects in the wreck. And he understood that the implications were staggering. If the mechanism was what the X-rays suggested, then the ancient Greeks had achieved a level of mechanical sophistication that no one had thought possible. The entire history of technology would need to be rewritten. Price spent 20 years studying the mechanism. He published his findings in 1959 in a short paper titled An Ancient Greek Computer, and then, in 1974, in a full-length monograph titled Gears from the Greeks. The monograph was a landmark, the first comprehensive study of the mechanism, including detailed gear counts, ratio analyses, and a proposed reconstruction of the device's function. The academic response was cautious. Many historians of science found Price's claims extravagant. A mechanical computer from the 1st century BCE, precision gearing that rivaled 14th century clockwork, ep-I-cyclic gear trains that modeled planetary motion, it seemed too much, too advanced, too far ahead of what the ancient world was supposed to be capable of. Price received letters from colleagues who told him, politely but firmly, that he was wrong, that the mechanism could not be what he said it was, that the ancient Greeks did not build things like that. One reviewer described his monograph as a remarkable exercise in creative reconstruction, which sounds like a compliment but was not. Price died in 1983, having spent the last 30 years of his career defending his interpretation of the mechanism against a skepticism that was often more emotional than rational. He was right. He was right about almost everything: the gear count, the function, the sophistication, the date. But he died before the proof arrived. The proof would take another 30 years, and a technology that had not yet been invented to arrive. There is something about the mechanism's history that I want to hold for a moment. It is this: every person who has studied the mechanism has been changed by it. Price spent his career on it. Freeth spent his career on it. The Greek archaeologists, the British physicists, the American engineers, the mathematicians and historians and conservators who have touched these fragments, all of them have come away altered. Not in the way that a beautiful painting alters you or a moving piece of music. In a deeper way. In the way that encountering something impossible alters you, something that should not exist, according to everything you thought you knew, but does exist, and its existence requires you to rethink everything. The mechanism is an argument. It argues against the idea that progress is linear, that the past is always simpler than the present, that knowledge accumulates in a straight line from ignorance to understanding. The mechanism says, no, the past contained pockets of brilliance that the future forgot. The past contained achievements that the future had to rediscover. The past is not a lesser version of the present. It is a different version, and in some respects, a superior one. There is something about the history of the mechanism that mirrors the mechanism itself. The same patience, the same long cycles of obscurity and revelation. The object was built in the 1st century BCE. It was lost in the 1st century BCE. It was found in 1901. It was recognized as significant in 1902. It was properly studied in 1959. It was fully imaged in 2006. And it was digitally reconstructed in 2021. Each step took decades. Each step required someone to look more carefully, with better tools, with more patience than the person before. The mechanism taught patience to everyone who studied it. It refused to give up its secrets quickly. It demanded that each generation bring its best technology and its most careful attention, and even then, it revealed only part of itself, saving the rest for the future, the way it had always done. Let us go back to the ship. Not to the wreck, to the ship as it was, whole, floating, alive with the sounds of crew and cargo and the creak of timber under sail. Let us go back to the last voyage, before the water, before the silence, before 2,000 years of darkness. The ship sailed from the eastern Mediterranean, from Rhodes, most likely, or from one of the nearby ports that served as collection points for the luxury goods trade. The cargo had been assembled over weeks, perhaps months, each item purchased or commissioned individually, carefully packed in straw and sawdust, loaded into the hold in an order that balanced the weight evenly across the keel. Bronze statues in the center for stability. Marble along the sides, wedged in place with timber. Smaller items, glassware, pottery, the mechanism, packed in chests and secured against the hull. The voyage would have taken the ship westward, past the southern coast of Crete, through the strait between Crete and the Peloponnese, the strait where Antikythera sits like a sentinel, and then northwestward, past the Peloponnese, past the Ionian Islands, across the Adriatic to the coast of Italy. The total distance was perhaps 1,000 nautical miles. In good weather, with favorable winds, the journey might take 2 weeks. In bad weather, with headwinds and storms, it might take a month or more, the ship sheltering in harbors along the way, waiting for conditions to improve, the crew growing restless, the captain watching the sky. The sea itself, the Mediterranean in autumn, has a particular quality that is worth describing, because it is the last thing the mechanism would have known before the darkness. The water is still warm from the summer months, perhaps 20 degrees Celsius at the surface, dropping to 14 or 15 at depth. The color is a deep, saturated blue, the blue that gives the Mediterranean its name, from the Latin medius terra, the sea in the middle of the land. In calm weather, the surface is glassy, reflecting the sky so perfectly that the horizon disappears, and the ship seems to float in an infinite blue sphere. In rough weather, the water turns dark, gray-green, opaque, angry, and the waves rise steeply, far more steeply than ocean waves, because the Mediterranean is a confined basin and the wind has less space to work. The mechanism was somewhere in the hold, packed in a chest, perhaps, or wrapped in cloth, cushioned against the vibration of the hull. It was traveling for the first time since it had been built, leaving the workshop on Rhodes, leaving the island where it had been created, heading westward toward a destination where it would be displayed, or sold, or presented as a gift to some Roman collector who would marvel at its complexity without fully understanding its mathematics. We do not know who owned it. We do not know who it was intended for. We do not know whether the craftsman who built it was still alive, or whether the mechanism had already passed through several hands, each owner understanding it a little less than the one before, the way knowledge fades as it moves away from its source, like heat dissipating from a fire. The ship entered the Strait of Antikythera. The strait is roughly 30 miles wide. The current runs strong, a westward flow that pushes through the gap between Crete and the Peloponnese, driven by the general circulation of the Mediterranean. In calm weather, the current is manageable. In rough weather, it combines with wind and waves to create conditions that ancient sailors feared. What happened next is speculation built on evidence. The ship went down. It went down quickly enough that the crew could not save the cargo, but slowly enough, or in shallow enough water initially, that the wreck did not compact into a single mass. The cargo scattered across the slope as the hull broke up, the heaviest items settling first, the lighter items drifting downslope in the current. The mechanism, small and relatively light, came to rest among the larger statues, surrounded by the marble and bronze bodies that had been its traveling companions. And then the silence began. If you have followed the story this far, through the workshop and the wreck and the museum and the decades of waiting, then you have been holding many things in your mind. The gears, the inscriptions, the astronomical cycles, the craftsman's hands, the diver's ascent. Let them go for a moment. There is nothing to hold now, nothing to remember, only the silence. The silence of deep water. The silence of a place where sound moves differently, slowly, heavily, muffled by pressure and density. The creak of timber stopped as the wood rotted away. The clink of bronze on marble stopped as the current buried the objects in silt. The voices of the crew, whatever they had said in those last moments, whatever prayers or curses or simple cries of terror they had uttered, were swallowed by the water and never heard again. The gears stopped turning. The pointers stopped moving. The cosmos, which the craftsman had encoded so carefully, so precisely, with such extraordinary ambition, the cosmos froze. The sun stopped at whatever position the dial showed when the water reached it. The moon stopped. The planets stopped. And the Saros cycle, which had been spiraling outward on its 18-year track, stopped too, frozen at a date that, if we could read it, would tell us the last time anyone turned the crank. But we cannot read it. The corrosion has claimed that detail, along with so many others. And so the last date is lost, like the last words of the crew, like the name of the craftsman, like the destination of the voyage. All lost, all silent, all waiting in the dark. If you are still with me, and if you are not, if the silence of the deep water has carried you down into your own quiet place, that is as it should be, I want to tell you what happened next. Not next in the story of the mechanism, next in the story of the world. The world forgot. Not all at once, not completely. Echoes persisted. The Islamic world preserved much of Greek astronomy, translating Ptolemy's Almagest into Arabic, building astrolabes that encoded some of the same astronomical knowledge that the mechanism contained. The astrolabe is a simpler device, a flat, two-dimensional model of the celestial sphere, without gears, but it was built on the same intellectual foundation. The Islamic astronomers did not have the mechanism. They did not know it had existed, but they had the texts that informed it, and they built their own tools from those texts, and in doing so, they kept a thread of the tradition alive. When that thread reached medieval Europe, through the translation movements of the 12th and 13th centuries, when Arabic texts were translated into Latin in the libraries of Toledo and Sicily. It ignited the clock-making tradition that would eventually reinvent the gear train. But by then, the connection to the original was lost. The medieval clockmakers did not know they were reinventing. They thought they were inventing. And in a sense, they were, because reinvention without knowledge of the original is, experientially, indistinguishable from invention. The effort is the same. The ingenuity is the same. Only the priority is different. The mechanism slept, in the silt, in the dark, in the same sea that the craftsman had sailed and the ship had crossed and the divers would one day descend into. The same cold, patient, preserving water. 2,000 years is a long time to sleep. Let us measure it, just for a moment, in the mechanism's own terms, in the cycles it was built to track. 2,000 years is roughly 105 meh-ton-ik cycles, 105 repetitions of the 19-year pattern in which the phases of the moon return to the same days of the solar year. It is roughly 111 Saros cycles, 111 repetitions of the eclipse pattern, each one bringing the sun and moon into roughly the same alignment. It is 500 Olympiads, 500 four-year cycles, 500 imaginary games that the mechanism's pointer would have tracked, spiraling around its dial in a room that no longer existed, in a world that had moved on. If the craftsman could have turned the crank 2,000 years forward, if the gears had been strong enough, the bronze unyielding enough, the dials would have shown him the sky of 1901. The positions of the planets on the day Elias Stadiatis descended into the water. The phase of the moon. The eclipses that year. The mechanism would have connected the two men across 20 centuries. The same cosmos, the same cycles, the same bronze. The sky that the craftsman encoded is the same sky that the diver saw when he surfaced, gasping, holding the bronze hand. The sky does not forget. It repeats. It cycles. It returns. And the mechanism was built to track those returns, to say that the cosmos is not chaos, that the motions of the heavens are knowable, and that knowledge, once encoded, endures. The mechanism endured. Not as a working device, the gears are locked, the pointers frozen, the dials corroded beyond reading, but as an idea, as proof that the idea was once realized, and as a challenge to every generation that encounters it. Can you build this? Can you understand it? Can you make the cosmos turn in your hands? In the autumn of 2005, a team of researchers carried a machine into the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The machine weighed 8 tons. It was called Blade Runner, a portable CT scanner, modified for use on archaeological objects, capable of producing three-dimensional X-ray images at a resolution of 50 microns. 50 microns, 1/20th of a millimeter. Enough to read inscriptions that had been invisible for 2,000 years. The project was called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, an international collaboration between Greek, British, and American scholars, led by astronomer Mike Edmonds and mathematician Tony Freeth. They had spent years preparing for this moment, designing the scanning protocol, modifying the equipment, negotiating access to the fragments. And now the machine was in the museum, and the fragments were on the scanning bed, and the X-rays were about to reveal what 2,000 years of corrosion had hidden. The first scans came back in December 2005. Tony Freeth, who would spend the next 2 decades of his life studying the mechanism, has described the moment of seeing the first high-resolution images. The detail was overwhelming. Where the earlier X-rays had shown shadows and suggestions, the ghost outlines of gears, partially visible through the corrosion, the CT scans showed everything. Every gear tooth, every rivet, every scratch and mark on the bronze surfaces. The mechanism, which had been opaque for a century, was suddenly transparent. Freeth compared it to opening a book that had been sealed shut for 2,000 years. The pages were still legible. The words were still there. You just needed the right light to read them. Inside the corroded mass, visible for the first time in high resolution, were the gears. Not as shadows or outlines, as the earlier X-rays had shown, but as detailed, three-dimensional objects, their teeth clearly defined, their arrangement legible, their interactions mappable. The researchers could see gear trains that Price had suspected but never confirmed. They could see gear ratios that explained functions that had been debated for decades. They could see the eccentric mount of the lunar anomaly gear, the brilliant mechanical trick that translated uniform rotation into non-uniform output. And they could see the inscriptions. The mechanism was covered in text. Engraved into the bronze plates in tiny Greek letters, some less than 2 millimeters high, were instructions, descriptions, and astronomical data. The inscriptions had been invisible under the corrosion. The CT scanner made them legible. And when the researchers began to read them, they realized that the mechanism was even more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The inscriptions totaled over 3,500 characters of ancient Greek text, roughly the length of a short essay. They had been engraved on both the front and back cover plates of the mechanism, in letters so small that the engraver must have used a magnifying lens, which the ancients did possess, in the form of polished crystal or water-filled glass spheres. The back cover inscription described the mechanism's functions in the voice of someone explaining the device to a user. The spiral dial has 223 divisions. One section reads, describing the Saros eclipse predictor. It mentioned the color of eclipses, the reddish glyphs that the Saros dial inscriptions had already hinted at. It described the planetary displays. It listed the gear ratios for the major cycles. It was, in effect, a user manual engraved into the device itself, so that the information would never be separated from the object it described. The front cover inscription was different. It was not a user manual. It was a description of the cosmos itself, a technical account of the astronomical phenomena that the mechanism modeled, written in a style that suggests an educated audience. Someone who understood astronomy. Someone who would appreciate the precision of the device not just as a mechanical achievement, but as an intellectual one. The inscription was speaking to a peer. It was one mind addressing another across the surface of bronze, saying, "This is what I know, this is what I have built, and this is how it works." Think about that. The craftsman who built the mechanism, who cut the gears and filed the teeth and assembled the gear trains, also wrote instructions. He anticipated that the device would need explaining. He knew that the mathematics it encoded were complex enough that a user might not understand them intuitively. And so he wrote the explanation into the bronze, permanently, indelibly, in letters so small that they required a magnifying glass to read even when the mechanism was new. He was thinking about the future, about users he would never meet, about the moment when the device would leave his workshop and enter the world, and he would not be there to explain it. He could not have imagined how far into the future his inscriptions would travel. He could not have known that the users who would finally read them would be not Greek astronomers, but 21st century physicists, reading through the eyes of a CT scanner, translating his ancient Greek with the help of digital image processing. He could not have known that his user manual would be the key to unlocking the mechanism's secrets, 2,000 years after he wrote it, in a world he could not have conceived of, by people using technologies that would have seemed to him like magic. But he wrote it anyway. He engraved the instructions into the bronze, and the bronze held them. Through the shipwreck and the salt water and the corrosion and the centuries of silence and the museum drawer and the decades of misunderstanding, the bronze held the words. And when the technology finally existed to read them, they were there. Still legible, still explaining, still speaking in the quiet, precise voice of a craftsman who wanted his work to be understood. Not all of the mechanism has been decoded. This is the part of the story that keeps scientists awake at night, the part that ensures the mechanism will be studied for decades, perhaps centuries to come. Despite the CT scanning, despite the inscriptions, despite over a century of analysis by some of the finest minds in the history of science, there are gears in the mechanism whose function remains uncertain. There are gear trains whose output is debated. There are connections between components that the corrosion has destroyed, leaving gaps in the mechanical logic that can be filled only by inference and educated guessing. The planetary display is the biggest mystery. The front dial of the mechanism showed the positions of the 5 known planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, moving against the background of the zodiac. The gear trains that drove these displays must have been enormously complex, because planetary motion is enormously complex. Retrograde motion alone, the apparent backward movement of planets in the sky, caused by the relative positions of Earth and the planet in their orbits, requires a mechanical system that can produce forward motion, then backward motion, then forward motion again in a smooth and continuous cycle. The UCL team, a group of researchers at University College London, led by Tony Freeth, published a digital reconstruction of the mechanism in 2021 that made headlines around the world. Published in the journal Scientific Reports, the paper proposed a complete solution to the front display, including all 5 planetary mechanisms. Their model used EP-IC click gearing, gears mounted on gears, rotating on rotating platforms, to reproduce the complex motions of all 5 planets. The total gear count in their reconstruction was 69, more than double the number that can be directly confirmed from the surviving fragments. The reconstruction was elegant, plausible, and internally consistent. It showed that the mechanism could have worked, that a device of this size, with this many gears, could have accurately modeled planetary motion. Freeth's team even built a working digital simulation, a computer model that replicated the gear trains and showed the output dials moving in real time, the planets advancing and retreating against the zodiac, the moon speeding and slowing through its anomaly, the eclipse predictor spiraling through its 18-year cycle. Watching the simulation is an uncanny experience. The gears move smoothly. The pointers track the heavens with visible precision, and you realize that you are watching, in digital form, the same display that someone on Rhodes watched 2,000 years ago, turning the crank, watching the cosmos unfold, holding the universe in a bronze box. But it is a reconstruction, not a certainty. The planetary gears are the most heavily corroded section of the mechanism, and the CT scans, while extraordinary, cannot resolve every detail. Other researchers have proposed alternative reconstructions, different gear arrangements, different gear counts, different mechanical solutions to the same astronomical problem. The debate continues. The gears keep their secrets. There is a gear in the mechanism, gear B1, in the researcher's notation, whose purpose has never been satisfactorily explained. It sits in a position that suggests it is part of the planetary display, but its gear ratio does not correspond neatly to any known planetary period. Some researchers think it is a differential gear, a device that combines 2 inputs to produce a single output, the same principle used in the rear axle of a car. If so, it would be the oldest known differential gear, by over 1,000 years. Others think it is part of a display that is no longer extant, a pointer or dial that was broken off in the shipwreck and lost, leaving the gear that drove it as an orphan in the mechanism's logic. The gear is there. It is real. It meshed with other gears. It did something, but what it did remains, for now, unknown. There are other mysteries. The mechanism's case, the wooden housing that enclosed the gears and protected them from dust and damage, is entirely gone. Wood does not survive 2,000 years in salt water. The only evidence of the case comes from traces of wood fiber embedded in the corrosion products and from the attachment points on the bronze plates where the case was fastened. The case may have had a lid. It may have had latches. It may have had handles. We do not know. The mechanism, as we have it, is naked, its internal workings exposed, its protective shell dissolved. It is like finding the movement of a pocket watch without the case, functional, intelligible, but stripped of the context that would tell you how it was carried, how it was stored, how it was treated in the hands of its owner. And then there is the question of how many mechanisms were made. Was this the only one? Or was it one of many, a standard product of a workshop that manufactured astronomical instruments for sale? The inscriptions suggest a sophisticated, experienced maker, someone who had built devices like this before, who knew how to engrave instructions, who had refined the design over multiple iterations. This does not feel like a prototype. It feels like a mature product, which implies earlier versions, which implies other mechanisms, now lost, that we may never find. In 2012, a second survey of the Antikythera wreck was conducted using modern diving equipment and robotic submersibles. The team found additional human remains, including a near-complete skeleton, remarkably preserved in the sediment. They found new bronze fragments, new pottery, new glass, but no second mechanism. If there was another device on the ship, it has not been found. If there were other devices in other shipwrecks, in other museum drawers, in other unexcavated sites around the Mediterranean, they remain hidden. The Antikythera Mechanism is, for now, unique, the only one of its kind, a singularity in the archaeological record. And this, perhaps, is the most fitting thing about the mechanism, that it still contains mysteries, that even after a century of study, even after CT scanning and digital reconstruction, and the combined efforts of physicists and mathematicians and historians and engineers, the device has not been fully understood. The craftsmen who built it encoded more knowledge than we have yet recovered. The bronze still holds secrets that the bronze has not released. The gears are still turning. Not literally, they have been locked in corrosion for 2 millennia, but metaphorically. The mechanism is still working, still producing new questions, still driving new research, still compelling the same kind of focused, patient attention that the craftsman himself must have brought to his bench on Rhodes 2,000 years ago. It is, in a way, still computing, still processing, still yielding outputs that require interpretation. The inputs are no longer the motions of the heavens. The inputs are the curiosity of the scientists who study it, and the outputs are not predictions of eclipses. The outputs are insights into the nature of the ancient mind, into what our ancestors knew, and how they knew it, and how much we have still to learn from what they left behind. If you are still here, still listening, still awake, then you are part of this process. You are another person in the long chain of people who have paid attention to the mechanism. From the craftsman to the diver, to the archaeologist, to the physicist to you. Each one looking more carefully than the last, each one seeing a little more. And if you have drifted off, the gears will keep turning, they always have. Let me tell you one more thing about the unknown gears before we close this chapter. It is this: the mechanism teaches us something about the limits of knowledge that is, in its own way, as valuable as the knowledge itself. We have learned over the past century to read the mechanism, to decode its gear trains, to translate its inscriptions, to understand its astronomical models. But the mechanism has also taught us that some things cannot be read, that some knowledge is lost beyond recovery. That the corrosion has claimed details that no amount of scanning will restore, and that the missing pieces of the device, the gears that broke away, the plates that dissolved, the case that rotted, are gone forever. The mechanism teaches patience and humility in equal measure. It says, "Here is what I can show you, and here is where my silence begins." Let me tell you about the gap. 1,400 years. That is the span of time between the Antikythera mechanism and the next known device of comparable complexity, the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe. 1,400 years during which no one, anywhere in the world, is known to have built anything like it. The mechanism was built around 100 BCE. The first geared astronomical clocks appeared in Europe around 1300 CE. In between, nothing, or rather, nothing that has survived, nothing that we have found. Nothing in the archaeological record, nothing in the historical sources, nothing in the material remains of any civilization for 14 centuries. How is this possible? How does a technology this sophisticated simply vanish? The answer is not a single event. It is a process. The slow, cumulative loss of knowledge that occurs when a civilization contracts. When the workshops close and the apprentices disperse, and the libraries burn, and the trade routes that carried bronze and ideas and craftsmen from one end of the Mediterranean to the other are severed by wars and migrations and the collapse of the political systems that maintained them. The mechanism was a product of a very specific moment in history, the late Hellenistic period, when Greek science and mathematics were at their peak, when Rhodes was a wealthy, cosmopolitan trading center, when the tools and materials and training and intellectual framework required to build such a device were all available in the same place at the same time. Remove any one of these elements, the wealth, the trade, the training, the mathematical knowledge, and the mechanism becomes impossible. And they were all removed, not at once, not by a single catastrophe, but gradually, over centuries, as the Roman Empire absorbed the Greek world and then itself declined, the conditions that had made the mechanism possible disappeared. The workshops on Rhodes closed. The astronomical tradition that had begun with Hipparchus continued for a time. Ptolemy, in the 2nd century CE, wrote the Almagest, the definitive astronomical text of the ancient world. But the tradition of translating astronomical knowledge into mechanical form died. The craftsmen who could cut gears with 1.5 mm teeth by lamplight were not replaced. Their students were not trained. Their techniques were not written down. The knowledge did not vanish in a fire. Though fires played their part, the Library of Alexandria, which may have held copies of the astronomical texts that informed the mechanism, was damaged or destroyed multiple times between the 1st century BCE and the 7th century CE. Each time, knowledge was lost. Not all of it. Not irrecoverably in most cases. But enough. Enough that the chain of understanding was weakened, link by link, until it broke. The knowledge faded. It dimmed. It went out, the way a lamp goes out when no one refills the oil, not with a dramatic flame, but with a slow, silent guttering that no one notices until the room is dark. There is a melancholy in this that I want to sit with for a moment, if you will permit it. Or if you have drifted off, if the long centuries of silence have carried you down, then drift. There is no urgency here. The mechanism waited 1,400 years. The story can wait a little longer. The melancholy is this. The craftsmen on Rhodes built something extraordinary, something that represented the peak of a tradition spanning centuries, Babylonian observation, Egyptian record-keeping, Greek mathematics, Rhodian craftsmanship. All of it converging in a single device, in a single workshop, in the hands of a single person. And then the tradition ended, not because it failed, not because a better technology replaced it, but because the civilization that sustained it could no longer sustain itself. The tradition died of neglect, of indifference, of the slow erosion of the systems, education, trade, patronage, peace, that made complex knowledge possible. And then, 1,400 years later, in the workshops of medieval Europe, the gears began to turn again. The medieval clockmakers did not know about the Antikythera mechanism. They could not have. It was lying on the seafloor, buried in silt, forgotten. They reinvented the gear train independently, starting from first principles, from the simple gears used in mills and water wheels, gradually increasing the complexity, the precision, the ambition of their mechanisms until they had built devices that could track the motions of the heavens. It took centuries. The first mechanical clocks appeared around 1280, tower clocks, driven by falling weights, regulated by a mechanism called a verge escapement that allowed the gears to advance in controlled steps. The first astronomical clocks, clocks that showed the positions of the sun and moon and planets, appeared in the 14th century. The astronomical clock in the Cathedral of Strasbourg, built in 1354, showed the positions of the sun and moon and calculated the date of Easter. It was considered a wonder of the age. It was also, by any objective comparison, less sophisticated than the Antikythera Mechanism, which had modeled 5 planets, predicted eclipses, tracked multiple astronomical cycles, and calculated the dates of sporting events, all in a device small enough to carry. The precision of these early devices was poor compared to the Antikythera Mechanism. The Strasbourg clock lost several minutes per day. The mechanism, if its gear ratios are accurately reconstructed, would have been accurate to within 1 day in several hundred years for the Meh-Tun-Ik cycle. It would not be until the 17th century, with the invention of the pendulum clock by Christ on High Gents in 1657, that European timekeeping achieved a level of accuracy comparable to what the Greek craftsmen had achieved 2,000 years earlier. 2,000 years, that is the gap. Not 1,400, that is the gap between the mechanism and the first medieval gears. The gap between the mechanism and comparable precision is 2 millennia. 20 centuries of human history during which no one, anywhere, built a device as accurate as the one that was lying at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. We reinvented it. That is the phrase that captures the whole strange, humbling history of the mechanism. We did not build on the Greek achievement. We did not refine it or improve it or take it to the next level. We lost it, completely, totally. And then, over the course of a millennium, we reinvented it from scratch, rediscovering the principles, relearning the techniques, rebuilding the tradition, without knowing that it had all been done before. The craftsman on Rhodes, cutting his gears by lamplight, would have recognized the clockmaker's bench in 14th century Strasbourg. He would have recognized the files and the gravers and the dividing plates. He would have recognized the gears, different in detail, but identical in principle. He would have looked at the astronomical clock in the cathedral and understood it instantly, not as a new invention, but as a rediscovery of something he had known all along. And he might have wept, or he might have smiled, because the fact that it was reinvented means that the impulse was not unique to him. The desire to encode the cosmos in mechanism, to hold the universe in a box, to make the invisible visible, to prove that the motions of the heavens are knowable and reproducible, that desire is not the property of any one civilization. It is human. It is the thing that connects a Greek workshop on Rhodes in 100 BCE to a German cathedral in 1350 CE to a British museum in 2006 CE. The tools change. The materials change. The understanding deepens. But the impulse, the need to know, the need to build, the need to hold the cosmos in your hands, that remains. The night is deep now. The story has traveled far from Rhodes to Antikythera, from the seafloor to the museum, from the craftsman's bench to the physicist's laboratory. If you are still awake, you have traveled with it. And if you are not, if you slipped away somewhere between the gears and the centuries, then you are where you should be, at rest, in the dark. The way the mechanism was at rest in the dark for 2,000 years. There is nothing wrong with darkness. The mechanism proved that. It held its secrets in the dark and gave them up when the light arrived. The mechanism is in Athens. Fragment A, the largest piece, sits in a glass case in the National Archaeological Museum, displayed alongside the bronze statues that were recovered from the same wreck. It is small, smaller than you expect. A corroded lump of green metal, roughly the size of a large book, with the faint outlines of gears visible through cracks in the incrustation. Visitors walk past it on their way to the statues. The youth of Antikythera draws the crowds, magnificent, life-sized, gleaming after a century of restoration. The mechanism sits nearby, in its case, and most visitors glance at it and move on. It does not look like much. It does not look like the most sophisticated technology of the ancient world. It does not look like a device that rewrote the history of science and proved that our ancestors were capable of things we had not imagined. But the craftsman would understand. He built it to be functional, not beautiful. He built it to work. And it does still in a way, not as a calculator, not as an eclipse predictor, but as a proof. A proof that the ancient world contained minds as ambitious as any that have existed since. A proof that the desire to understand the cosmos is not new, is not modern, is not the product of the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment or the industrial age. It is old. It is ancient. It is as old as the first person who looked at the night sky and wanted to know why the lights moved. And the craftsman, the unnamed genius on Rhodes, working by lamplight, cutting gears with a file, encoding the universe in bronze. He is anonymous. He will probably always be anonymous. The mechanism bears no maker's mark. No inscription says, "I name, built this." He vanished into the same silence that swallowed the ship and the crew and the workshop and the tradition. He is as invisible as the furnace workers beneath the Roman baths, as invisible as the builders of the pyramids, as invisible as every person in history who made something extraordinary and was not credited for it. But the mechanism exists, and it speaks for him. It speaks in the language of gears, in the click of tooth against tooth, in the precise ratios that encode the Meh-Tun-Ik cycle and the Saros cycle and the motion of the 5 planets. It speaks in the inscriptions, in the tiny Greek letters that describe the cosmos with the care and precision of a craftsman who wanted his work to outlast him. It speaks, most of all, in the fact of itself. In the simple, astonishing fact that 2,000 years ago, someone looked at the night sky and thought, "I can build that." The gears exist. The inscriptions exist. The work of his hands has survived for over 2,000 years, longer than the empires that rose and fell in the interim, longer than the cities that were built and destroyed, longer than the libraries that burned and the books that were lost. The bronze endured. The gears endured. The ambition endured. We did not invent the computer. We reinvented it. And the person who invented it first, who saw the cosmos turning and thought, "I can build that," that person deserves to be remembered. Not by name, because we do not have it, but by the thing they made, by the gears that still turn in the imagination of everyone who learns about them. By the machine that sat on the seafloor for 2 millennia, and then, when the world was finally ready to understand it, gave up its secrets. Slowly, patiently, 1 gear at a time. The archive closes for tonight. Rest now, and if you dream of gears, of bronze catching lamplight, of the click of teeth engaging, of a cosmos held in the palm of a hand, then the craftsman is still at work, still cutting, still filing, still encoding the universe in the only material that will outlast him. The gears still turn.